No, she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. This can't be true. But it was. Her father's downfall had funded Adrian's empire. Her own pursuit of vengeance had been fueled by a legacy she hadn't even understood. The groom's brutal wedding day revenge hadn't just been personal. It had been the closing of a circle written long before either of them had drawn breath. Adrian Cole was a billionaire groom adored by the world, but on his wedding day he did not walk down the aisle to declare love. He walked in with brutal revenge on his mind. The woman everyone thought he cherished had tried to fool him, but he was about to prove she underestimated the wrong man. Why would a man who had everything risk it all in front of the world? How could a wedding turn into a battlefield of betrayal? And what shocking truth would make millions question who the real villain was? Adrian Cole's story didn't begin with wealth, but with hunger. In a small, crumbling apartment, he grew up watching his mother's hands bleed from scrubbing dishes and mending clothes just to keep them alive. His father had long abandoned them for another woman when Adrian was only 5, leaving behind nothing but debt collectors and broken promises. That betrayal carved into Adrian a wound that never closed. People closest to you are the ones most likely to betray you. But even in suffering, Adrian had fire. He was mocked for wearing second-hand shoes, yet while other children played games, Adrian taught himself how to fix radios and later code on borrowed library computers. By 15 he wasn't just surviving, he was hustling. At 20 he was creating apps. By 30 he built a tech empire. His name was splashed across magazine covers. From poverty to power, the billionaire who beat the odds. The world celebrated Adrian's genius, but he knew success was a double-edged sword. Money gave him security, but it also drew leeches, friends who used him, partners who wanted control, and investors who tried to exploit his hunger. Every betrayal left him sharper, more careful. Still, deep inside he yearned for something money couldn't buy: genuine love. Then he met Elena. She wasn't like the women he had met before, or so he thought. She carried herself with elegance, spoke with grace, and listened with eyes that seemed to see past his billions. For the first time in years, Adrian felt disarmed. With Elena, he believed he could finally have what he once told his mother he longed for: wealth and love. But beneath her flawless smile was a secret that would one day explode in front of the world. Elena wasn't searching for love, she was searching for a prize. Raised by a mother who drilled one lesson into her head: marry rich or live poor, Elena had perfected the art of seduction and calculation. Adrian was not a soulmate to her, but a golden opportunity. The irony? Every betrayal Adrian had suffered in the past had prepared him for this. He had learned patience, foresight, and control. Yet when it came to Elena, he let his guard down. That weakness was all she needed to weave her plan. But Adrian Cole was not the boy who used to be powerless. He was a man who had mastered the art of waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, at the very altar, his revenge would not only shatter Elena's life but also shake the trust of everyone watching. Adrian Cole had built his empire brick by brick, line of code by line of code, but he never forgot the sting of poverty. Every boardroom victory was a reminder of where he had come from, and what he swore he would never return to. By his early 30s, Adrian was worth billions. His tech firm dominated the industry, his face appeared on Forbes covers, and governments sought his counsel. He lived in penthouses, drove sleek cars, and hosted gala dinners where the world's most powerful people shook his hand. But what the cameras never captured was the silence he returned to when the applause ended. Yes, Adrian had money. But money did not whisper goodnight. Money did not look at you with warmth. Money did not guard you against loneliness. His closest allies were his mother and a few childhood friends who had stuck by him. Yet even in their company, a hollow space remained. He had learned to question motives. Was this person calling him because they cared or because they wanted something? Was that smile genuine or a mask for greed? It was in the midst of this quiet isolation that Elena entered his world. They first met at a charity auction. Adrian had funded scholarships for underprivileged children, a cause close to his heart. Elena was radiant that night, draped in a crimson gown, her voice soft yet commanding. She bid on items not because she wanted them, but because she knew eyes were watching. And when she finally approached Adrian, her words were perfectly measured, not too flattering to seem fake, not too cold to appear disinterested. "You remind me of someone," she had said with a smile. "Who?" Adrian asked, curious. "A boy I once knew who wanted to change the world." Simple words, but they struck at the part of him still carrying the child who once starved in the shadows. She had spoken directly to the one place Adrian was most vulnerable: his desire to be seen for more than his wealth. Soon they became inseparable. Elena attended business galas by his side, winning over investors with her charm. She met his mother, showering her with affection so convincing that even the old woman softened toward her. For the first time, Adrian felt his walls cracking. But cracks, no matter how small, are dangerous in the wrong places. Elena, behind her perfect manners, was studying him. Every detail of his schedule, every habit, every fear, she took note. She laughed at his jokes but listened even closer to his silences. She knew which of his partners disliked him. She knew which of his rivals were circling. She knew exactly how much he wanted to believe that she loved him for who he was, not what he had. And Adrian, so careful with business, so ruthless with competitors, failed to notice the game being played in his own home. He believed he had finally found love, but Elena believed she had found her final conquest. What neither of them knew was that the day would come when both their beliefs would collide, and only one truth would survive. Elena Vasquez did not grow up in silk gowns and chandeliered halls. Her childhood unfolded in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the poorer side of the city, where the roof leaked during storms and her shoes always seemed one size too small. Her mother, Isabella, was once a woman of beauty and charm who believed love could save her. But love had betrayed her, just as it had betrayed Adrian's mother. Elena's father left when she was only 7, trading in his struggling family for another woman with more money and fewer problems. That abandonment hardened Isabella in ways her daughter could never forget. "Remember this, Elena," Isabella often said as she adjusted her daughter's worn school uniform. "Men don't stay. Love doesn't feed you. Love doesn't pay the rent. Marry rich or live poor. There is no middle ground." At first, Elena resisted. As a teenager, she wanted to believe in fairy tales. She wrote poetry in secret, dreamed of traveling, of finding someone who adored her for her spirit. But every dream was torn apart by the reality of overdue bills, eviction notices, and her mother crying quietly at night when she thought no one could hear. Elena learned that beauty was her only reliable currency. At 15, she realized the way men's eyes followed her at grocery stores and on the bus. By 17, she had practiced the art of the smile that made strangers buy her coffee or cover her bus fare. And by 21, she had perfected what Isabella called the strategy of survival. Her early relationships weren't about love, they were rehearsals. A wealthy lawyer who bought her designer handbags, an older businessman who introduced her to fine dining, a real estate mogul who whispered promises of a future he never delivered. Each man left her more polished, more calculating, more aware of what she needed to secure before time and beauty slipped away. Then came Adrian Cole. Unlike the others, Adrian didn't flaunt his wealth. He carried himself with restraint, almost humility. That intrigued her. To win a man like Adrian meant more than securing comfort. It meant conquering the pinnacle of society. He was the prize her mother had warned her not to miss. Still, a small part of her wrestled with guilt. On nights when Adrian's guard was down and he spoke of his past, the hunger, the father who left, the mother who sacrificed everything, Elena felt a flicker of something real. It almost disarmed her. Almost. But the echoes of Isabella's voice were louder. Love is weakness. Wealth is protection. So Elena buried the flicker and fanned the flame of ambition. She wasn't after Adrian's heart. She was after his empire, his name, his security. She would smile, charm, and play the perfect fiancé until the ring was on her finger and the fortune was in her grasp. What she didn't know was that Adrian had inherited more than just his mother's resilience. He had inherited his father's scars. And scars don't just remember pain, they prepare for war. When Adrian Cole announced his engagement to Elena Vasquez, the world erupted with fascination. Newspapers called it the union of wealth and beauty. Magazines splashed their photos across glossy covers. Adrian in tailored suits, Elena in shimmering gowns, the two of them smiling like royalty. The engagement party alone could have passed for a royal coronation. Guests arrived in black tie elegance, chandeliers blazed with crystal light, and a string quartet played softly in the background. The cameras adored them. Reporters whispered, "The perfect couple, the genius billionaire and the woman who stole his heart." But not everyone was convinced. Adrian's board members, veterans of betrayal and backroom deals, watched Elena with careful eyes. One leaned toward another muttering, "She's beautiful, yes. But too perfect, too smooth. No edges, no flaws. That's either dangerous or disastrous." His mother, too, harbored unease. Though Elena had showered her with kindness, there were moments when Isabella Cole would catch Elena's eyes wandering across the room, not at Adrian but at his watch, his cufflinks, his signature on a check. A mother's intuition whispered warnings she dared not voice. Yet Adrian silenced those doubts. He wanted to believe in love, to believe Elena was the exception in a world that constantly sought to exploit him. When she leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "I don't care about your billions. I just want you," something in him cracked. The boy who once starved wanted desperately to believe her. But cracks, as always, have consequences. For Elena, the engagement was a performance and she played her part flawlessly. She knew which charities to praise in front of reporters. She knew how to touch Adrian's hand in public just long enough for cameras to capture the tenderness. Behind closed doors, she studied his contracts, his partners, his weaknesses. She told herself it was for survival, but a darker part of her thrilled at the thought of one day holding the reins of his empire. One night, while planning the wedding, Elena sat before the mirror, wearing a diamond necklace Adrian had gifted her. The jewels sparkled under the light, but her reflection seemed to ask a silent question. What will you become once you have it all? Her answer came in the form of a phone call to her estranged mother. "Don't get soft, Elena," Isabella warned. "Remember, love is a luxury we can't afford. Seal the deal. Secure the future. Then and only then will you be free." The advice weighed heavy on Elena, but she swallowed it like medicine. She couldn't allow sentiment to ruin the plan. Meanwhile, Adrian prepared for the wedding with equal intensity, but his preparation was different. While the world saw him planning a fairy tale ceremony, he was quietly investigating whispers. A misplaced text on Elena's phone. A conversation that ended too quickly when he entered the room. Little inconsistencies he filed away in silence. To the world, Adrian was the love-struck groom. But inside he was sharpening his blade. The stage was set. The world was watching. And beneath the glittering smiles, two opposing games had already begun. It started with little things. A misplaced phone on the nightstand. A late-night message that buzzed too long before Elena silenced it. A whisper of a name Adrian didn't recognize, spoken too quickly, explained too vaguely. Adrian told himself not to overthink it. He had built an empire on logic, not paranoia. Yet, the very instinct that had helped him survive boardroom wars began whispering in his ear. Something doesn't add up. One night, he arrived home earlier than expected. He found Elena on the balcony, her voice low, urgent as she spoke into her phone. The moment she noticed him, her laughter rang out unnaturally, forced. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, calm but piercing. "Just my mother," she replied smoothly. Too smoothly. Adrian smiled, but his mind filed the lie away. He knew her mother hadn't taken calls in weeks. He had personally arranged medical care for Isabella Vasquez after an accident. If Elena could lie so easily, what else was she hiding? At their wedding rehearsal, another detail gnawed at him. Elena's eyes gleamed, not with joy but with calculation. She seemed more focused on the grandeur of the venue, the photographers, and the guest list of billionaires, than on him. When the priest recited words about vows and forever, her smile faltered for just a second. To anyone else it was nothing. To Adrian it was everything. That night, alone in his study, Adrian opened a file he had been building quietly for weeks. Inside were fragments, background checks, financial statements, discrete photographs. Elena wasn't as clean as she pretended to be. There were past relationships she never mentioned, luxury gifts she had once accepted from other men, debts that mysteriously vanished. It wasn't proof of betrayal, but it was enough to set his blood on fire. And then came the final straw. Adrian overheard her on a call with a friend days before the wedding. She thought he was asleep. "Don't worry," Elena whispered, her voice sharp, stripped of sweetness. "After the ring is on my finger, I'll be untouchable. He'll never see it coming." Those words sliced through Adrian like a blade. His chest tightened, but not with heartbreak. No, it was something colder, deadlier. He didn't rage. He didn't confront her. He simply sat in the darkness and listened, his mind already sculpting the shape of his revenge. He remembered his father's betrayal. He remembered his mother's tears. He remembered every partner who had tried to bleed him dry. And now, Elena thought she could write her name into that same story? Not this time. In that moment, Adrian made a vow to himself. This wedding would not be her victory. It would be her downfall. And he would craft the moment so devastating, so undeniable, that the entire world would see her for what she truly was. But Adrian knew one truth about revenge: it required patience. And patience was his sharpest weapon. The date was set. The invitation sent. The world would come to witness a wedding. But what they would see was a reckoning. The morning sun spilled across the estate like liquid gold. The mansion where the wedding was to be held glistened with floral arches, crystal chandeliers, and rows of silk-draped chairs. To the world, it was the event of the year, a billionaire's fairy tale where love and wealth would unite in glittering harmony. Guests arrived in designer suits and diamond-studded gowns, their chatter echoing with envy and awe. Helicopters circled overhead for aerial shots, and tabloids declared it the wedding of the century. At the center of it all stood Adrian Cole, the groom, immaculate in a tailored black tuxedo. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable. Photographers snapped frantically, mistaking his composure for happiness. But beneath the surface, Adrian's mind was razor-sharp, his heart encased in steel. He wasn't a man walking toward a vow. He was a man walking toward judgment. Across the hall, Elena was being transformed into a vision of perfection. Her gown, hand-stitched with pearls, cascaded like a river of ivory. The bridesmaids fussed over her veil, and makeup artists ensured no flaw could be found. Elena gazed at her reflection in the mirror, lips curving into a satisfied smile. This was it, the moment her mother had prepared her for. The moment where she would ascend from survival to supremacy. But even as she admired her beauty, unease prickled her chest. Adrian had been distant. Not cold but watchful. As if behind his warm smiles, something darker lurked. She pushed the thought aside. Soon, the papers would be signed, the ring slipped on, and everything she had schemed for would be hers. Outside, the orchestra played as guests took their seats. Billionaires, politicians, celebrities, everyone wanted a glimpse of the union between Adrian Cole and Elena Vasquez. The atmosphere sparkled with champagne and expectation. Adrian's mother sat quietly in the front row, her hands clasped tightly. She had warned her son subtly about Elena. But Adrian only gave her a look that said, "Trust me." Still, her heart pounded. A mother's intuition whispered of storms to come. The ceremony began. The priest's voice boomed as Elena walked down the aisle, every step measured, every smile rehearsed. The guests gasped at her beauty, whispering, "She's perfect. A queen." Adrian watched her approach, his gaze steady. To the world, it looked like a groom mesmerized by his bride. But in Adrian's mind, images flashed. The overheard phone call, the lies, the smirk when she thought no one was looking. Each memory fed the storm inside him. Elena reached him, her hand slipping into his. To the cameras it was a picture of love. But Adrian's grip was firm, unyielding, almost possessive. She blinked, startled by the coldness in his touch. The vows began. Adrian recited his with flawless delivery, voice smooth, words heavy with what sounded like devotion. The guests sighed, enchanted. Elena smiled, relieved, until his eyes locked on hers with a depth that unsettled her. For the first time Elena wondered, was she truly in control? The orchestra swelled. The world leaned forward, expecting a kiss, a promise, a happily ever after. But what Adrian had prepared for this day was not love. It was war. The guests leaned forward, breathless with anticipation. Cameras flashed, violin strings trembled, and the priest's voice carried the sacred words. "Do you, Adrian Cole, take Elena Vasquez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Adrian held Elena's hand, his gaze fixed on her face. To everyone watching, his silence looked like nervous joy. But inside he wasn't debating love, he was sharpening the knife of truth. "I do," Adrian said finally, voice firm, eyes unreadable. Applause rippled through the hall. Then came Elena's turn. "Do you, Elena Vasquez, take Adrian Cole?" "Yes, I do," she said quickly, her smile dazzling, rehearsed to perfection. The hall erupted in cheers, cameras capturing the image of a bride beaming at her billionaire groom. But Adrian wasn't finished. The priest lifted the Bible to bless the union, but Adrian raised his hand. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, calm but commanding, "I have something to share." The guests stilled. Even the orchestra faltered. Elena blinked, her perfect smile wavering. Adrian gestured, and suddenly screens around the hall flickered to life. Everyone turned, confused. Then came the audio. Elena's voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. "Don't worry. After the ring is on my finger, I'll be untouchable. He'll never see it coming." Gasps cut through the crowd. Elena froze, her face draining of color. On screen, images followed, documents Adrian had uncovered. Her hidden debts, her past relationships with wealthy men, her calculated messages to friends. Piece by piece, her facade unraveled in front of the entire world. Whispers rippled through the audience. She planned this? He knew all along? My God, she used him. Elena stumbled back, eyes wild. "Adrian, please," she hissed under her breath, forcing a smile for the cameras. "Stop this. You don't know what you're doing." But Adrian's face was carved in stone. "No, Elena," he said, his voice steady, echoing off marble walls. "For once, I know exactly what I'm doing." He turned to the guests. "This wedding was never about love. It was about deception. And I refuse to give my name, my life, or my empire to a fraud." The hall erupted in chaos. Some guests gasped in horror, others applauded his boldness. Cameras flashed, capturing the exact moment Elena's dream shattered into dust. Elena's mask cracked. Her voice trembled, but her desperation bled through. "Adrian, I can explain. Please, not like this. Don't do this to me." But Adrian leaned closer, his whisper for her alone. "You already did this to yourself." Then he stepped back, releasing her hand as if it burned him. The priest stammered, unsure what to do. The orchestra had fallen silent. The world had just watched a bride crowned in shame. Adrian turned to the audience, his jaw unshaken. "The ceremony is over." With that, he walked away from the altar, leaving Elena standing alone in her gown, her empire of lies collapsing around her. The guests rose in stunned silence. Headlines were already being written. And Elena? She stood trembling, her eyes darting between the cameras and the man who had outplayed her at her own game. But what none of them knew was that this wasn't the end. The real twist, the one that would make them all question who the true villain was still to come. By the next morning, Adrian and Elena's wedding had become the most viral story on the planet. Headlines screamed across every platform. Billionaire Groom exposes bride at the altar. Love story or brutal revenge? Adrian Cole breaks the internet. Elena Vasquez, gold digger or victim? Clips of the ceremony flooded social media. The moment her voice played on the big screens. The look of horror on her face. The words Adrian spoke before walking away. Every angle was analyzed, slowed down, replayed. Some applauded him for standing up to betrayal. Others condemned him, calling his public humiliation of Elena cruel, even sadistic. In one viral post, a journalist asked, "Did Adrian Cole expose the truth, or did he orchestrate a spectacle to destroy a woman who made a mistake?" Adrian ignored the noise. He locked himself in his penthouse office, sifting through contracts and statements as if nothing had happened. Yet beneath the calm, shadows flickered in his mind. He replayed the look in Elena's eyes, not just fear but something deeper. Something almost broken. Meanwhile, Elena's world collapsed overnight. Photographers hounded her as she left the estate, shoving microphones in her face. "Elena, did you use Adrian? Was it all a lie? Do you have anything to say to the millions who watched?" Her silence only fed the frenzy. Within hours, sponsors dropped her name from campaigns. Luxury brands revoked invitations. Friends she once entertained refused her calls. Even her mother's voice on the phone was sharp and merciless. "I told you to seal the deal, Elena. How could you fail?" But Elena wasn't broken. Not yet. In her private moments she seethed. Yes, Adrian had humiliated her. Yes, he had stripped her bare before the world. But she knew secrets too, secrets Adrian thought he had buried. And if she was going down, she would not go alone. One night, Elena sat at her desk, surrounded by scattered documents. Photos, receipts, whispers of deals Adrian had made in his rise to power, some ruthless, some questionable. She had spent months quietly collecting them just in case. Now that insurance became her weapon. She contacted an investigative journalist, one known for tearing apart the rich and powerful. "You want the real story on Adrian Cole?" she said into the phone, her voice low but fierce. "I'll give you everything. But you need to promise me, it all goes public." The journalist agreed. Within days, whispers about Adrian's empire began to surface. Stories of hostile takeovers. Employees driven to ruin. Rivals crushed not just by brilliance but by calculated cruelty. Suddenly, the public began to ask new questions. Was Adrian a betrayed man seeking justice, or a billionaire predator hiding behind the mask of victimhood? The narrative shifted. The controversy deepened. Adrian's victory no longer looked so clean. And as the scandal grew, one truth became clear. Adrian may have won at the altar, but Elena was far from finished. What neither of them realized was that their war had just ignited, and the world would soon learn a twist so shocking, it would force everyone to rethink who truly deserved sympathy. The empire Adrian Cole had built with sweat and blood suddenly felt fragile under the weight of whispers. At first, he dismissed Elena's counterstrike as desperation. But when the first exposé hit the headlines, the tone shifted. The article was ruthless. Behind the billionaire, Adrian Cole's ruthless rise. It detailed hostile takeovers, lawsuits silenced with money, and testimonies from former employees who claimed Adrian had destroyed lives in his climb to power. Adrian sat in his office, staring at the screen as his phone buzzed endlessly, investors demanding answers, partners reconsidering contracts, journalists circling like vultures. He had survived battles before. But this was different. This wasn't about numbers or market shares. This was personal. Elena hadn't just fought back, she had pulled at the very seams of the identity he had crafted. For the first time in years, Adrian remembered the boy he once was, the boy who watched his mother cry because she couldn't pay rent, the boy who swore he would never be powerless again. His revenge had been meant to protect that boy, to make sure no one ever humiliated him or his family again. But now, he wondered, had his hunger for control turned him into the very thing he hated? Meanwhile, Elena was burning the last of her bridges with fire. Her reputation in high society was ruined, but she didn't care. In secret apartments and shadowy meetings, she worked with journalists and lawyers, feeding them evidence against Adrian. She became relentless, obsessed. What Adrian had done to her at the altar was unforgivable, and she would not rest until the world turned on him as cruelly as he had turned on her. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Love is weakness. Wealth is protection." But for the first time, Elena realized she didn't just want wealth, she wanted vindication. She wanted Adrian to bleed publicly the way she had. Yet in quiet moments, doubt slipped in. She would replay the way Adrian had looked at her, calm, cold, but undeniably human. A part of her still wondered, what if things had been different? What if she had chosen love instead of ambition? But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. Love had no place here. Their war consumed the headlines. Public opinion split like a nation divided. Some said Adrian was a genius exposed by a bitter ex-fiancé. Others said Elena was a manipulative opportunist trying to destroy the man who had seen through her game. Both were right. And both were wrong. Because the truth, buried deep in the ruins of their battle, was darker than either imagined. Adrian thought he had controlled the story. Elena thought she had turned the tide. But there was a revelation waiting, hidden in the shadows of their past, that would unravel everything. And when it came to light, the world would no longer ask who was guilty. They would ask who was capable of going further. Adrian stood in the center of his penthouse, city lights sprawling endlessly behind him, but he felt nothing but shadows pressing in. Elena had pushed him to the edge and he had pushed her further. Their war had scorched reputations, businesses and families alike. Both had thought they were pulling the strings. Both had believed the other was finished. But then the letter arrived. It wasn't from a journalist or a lawyer or even Elena. It was from his late father's attorney, an envelope that had been delayed in delivery, marked to be opened only after my son's wedding. Hands trembling, Adrian tore it open. The words hit him harder than any exposé, harder than Elena's betrayal, harder than the humiliation he had orchestrated. Adrian, if you are reading this, you must know the truth. The fortune you inherited was not mine alone. Half of it belonged to a business partner I betrayed, a man who died in obscurity. His family was left with nothing. If fate is just, his bloodline will one day come knocking. When they do, remember this, you owe them everything. Adrian froze. His father's empire, the empire he had spent his life protecting, the very reason he had crushed Elena at the altar, was built on theft. And the family his father had ruined? The name was scrawled at the bottom of the letter like a ghost returning for vengeance. DeLuca. Elena's family. The realization hit him like fire in his veins. Elena hadn't stumbled into his life by accident. She was the heir of the very man his father destroyed. She wasn't just after his fortune, she was after justice, revenge woven into her bloodline. But here was the cruelest irony, she had never known. She thought she had been the predator, the mastermind. But in truth, she had been walking straight into a legacy written decades before her birth. Adrian's breath caught. For the first time, he wondered if she had ever really loved him, or if fate had pushed them together only so the cycle of vengeance could continue. When Elena later stormed into his penthouse to confront him, rage and triumph in her eyes, Adrian said nothing. He only handed her the letter. She read it once. Then again. Her hands shook. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. This can't be true." But it was. Her father's downfall had funded Adrian's empire. Her own pursuit of vengeance had been fueled by a legacy she hadn't even understood. The groom's brutal wedding day revenge hadn't just been personal. It had been the closing of a circle written long before either of them had drawn breath. For a long moment they stared at each other. Billionaire and bride. Predator and prey. Victim and executioner. But now the lines blurred. Who was who? Outside, cameras still flashed. The world still debated. But inside that penthouse, silence reigned. Because Adrian and Elena both realized the truth. They hadn't fooled each other. They had both been fooled by the past.